Hello, welcome to the Gauntlet podcast. Each month, we look back at games played by Gauntlet folks. My name is Ray, I use he, they pronouns, and I'm joined today by my lovely co-host, Sherri. Sherri, how are you doing today?
I am doing great, and I'm so excited about today's episode.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really, really good one. Today, we're joined by Kieron. So, Kieron, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kieron. I use he, him pronouns. I've been on the Gauntlet for 3 years, and I've listened to this podcast for like another 2 years before that as well. So I was like, increasingly, I'm like, oh no, I also listen to my podcast slightly faster. So like, this whole experience is doubly weird for me, because everything is a little bit more laid back than I'm used to. I'm a writer, like, I mainly write for comics, but I'm, a gamer, and I've got a Kickstarter at the moment, which is Die, which is a game I've made up with a very aggressive title.
I can't wait to get into it. It's a game that so many people on the Gauntlet are excited about. But first, we're going to talk about some gaming. So for our first segment, dear listeners, each of us gets to go over the RPGs we played, in this case, in the month of March and April. And we talk in depth about one game that we got to play on the Gauntlet calendar. So, Sherri, how was your gaming in the months of March and April?
It was, as always, pretty darn good. Off Gauntlet, I got to play more of the 13th Age with my face-to-face group. Another one of the face-to-face groups, but the online face-to-face group. We're playing Dune, and we just started it, and it was super exciting, and it was a bunch of players who had never sort of played Dune before, like even thought of it as a thing that they could play, and they got so excited about the idea. So that was fun to see. Also played Mage PBTA off Gauntlet. On Gauntlet, I played Balikbayan, Voidheart Symphony, and the Sprawl. And I'm going to actually discuss the Sprawl today, merely because it was a game that I remember when it first came out, and I heard about it. And I got so excited because I loved L. Tolstoyan cyberpunk books, and I played in a few games, and the games had a lot of frustrations to them. But I loved that sort of weird world, and it was my first introduction to this so-called genre of cyberpunk, okay? And of course, it's that very particular mission stuff. So when I heard that there was a PBTA game of the Sprawl, I rushed to get it, and it was fabulous. And I happened to be at Games on Demand that year, and the writer, Hamish Cameron, was there. And he was so gracious and kind and walked through what the missions were like. And I was like, yes! And I got home and we got to play it, and it was what I wanted. And this is 6 years later, we're playing it again. And I got to enjoy just how brilliant it is, even though in a lot of ways it's an early PBTA game. So, if you aren't familiar with the Sprawl, it is a game of mission-based action in a gritty neon and chrome cyberpunk future. It's for a GM and 2 to 4 players, and it's by Hamish Cameron. It is PBTA, is circa 2015, but it really captures that classic R. Tolstoyan cyberpunk feel, but without all the classic downers that go along with that. It's mission-based, pick a job, do the prep, do the mission, get paid, spend your loot. It's a loop, and it does not at any point pull any punches. You are getting punched all along. It's just like it's supposed to be. And the playbooks are like driver, fixer, hunter, infiltrator, killer, soldier, tech. If you're familiar with that cyberpunk stuff, those should all sound very familiar to you. So what worked for me was, one, I was playing the Sprawl as part of Rich Rogers' Star Wars Saturday series. So I had 3 amazing players I'd never played with before, which is always exciting. So I want to thank Alan, Will, and Brandon. But in Star Wars Saturday, this was set in Kerion City, which is cyberpunk setting. We've been playing some other cyberpunk games in there. So here it is. This game is sitting next to all these other cyberpunk games that we have played. And it was fun to visit that in sort of just after rapidly playing some other systems. One of the things I really like about the Sprawl is it has a collaborative world building phase that you do early on as part of character creation that really helps to make the world comprehensible to everyone who's sitting at the table. And it's fun to do. It's really nice because, of course, with the old situation with R. Tolstoyan, you had all these source books, and People would be reading them and studying them and buying all the wonkiest gear and the coolest things. And if you didn't know it all, you were at a horrible disadvantage. And if you didn't have the books, it was like the way they were talking a strange language. And there literally was like all these weird phrases and things they would say. And I'd be like, I don't even know what you guys mean, but I want to play this game. So, and there's none of that in this game. It's just a good basic, like, let's get in here and all have fun in the same place, in the same world. It has the advantage of PBTA links and relationships. So you establish those in that first session. And that's like a really good tweak for Cyberpunk because it reminds the players that they can't all be Blade Runners Deckard, all brooding and alone and the only cool guy. You're all in there and you're kind of a team. You have history with each other and you need other people. So that's a nice, great start to a Cyberpunk game. There is a move called Declare Contact, and it lets you add one useful NPC for your character for each mission, which is super fun. It's a great way that you're building the world, but you're also building like who you're going to interact with and the kind of people you keep around you. So it's like all these wonderful little world building pieces that just are built into this game so sensibly. There are prep moves that allow you to create a pool of currency for the mission, and those currencies are called intel or gear. These allow you to add +1s to your roll, and at any time you can pull from this pool. But what's really nice about it is that you get the chance to describe what the gear or intel is. And that gives you access to all the shiny chrome and hard truths of the world that you have to have without having to riffle through those pages of source books and find the exact thing that you're getting with its advantages and disadvantages. And the other thing is you've got all these other great players with you, so you can always turn to them if you need some ideas. But it really allows you to have sort of the cyberpunk situation that you want. It's right there. And the other thing that I really like about the Sprawl is the way it uses clocks. There are a lot of clocks in Sprawl. The best ones that I enjoy the most are the corporate clocks, where the better you are and the more you do, the faster you fill up those clocks that mean that the corp is aware of you and they're going to start gunning for you. So it really is a sort of weird punishment cycle for being awesome at what you're doing. But it puts the pressure on and it means things never get easier, even as you get better and you understand the world more and you have more assets. You're always, behind. The corps are bigger than you. And there was a really big difference between trying to just get past security and being hunted while trying to get in. So pressure's everywhere in this game. If there's anything I'm less sure about, this game pulls no punches. You get hurt, and it hurts you in a lot of ways. Everything you do has a chance to bring down more heat. You may or may not get paid, but that feels right for the genre. And
it feels like a tough Sprawl life.
Yes,
right?
Yes, and it means that like all of your fellows are really important to you because that's kind of how you get through things. They've got to pull you out, you've got to pull them out, and it does it naturally. It's not like, oh hey, the rules say we're friends. It's more like, oh my gosh, if we want to get out of this, we all gotta haul each other out. It's older PBTA, so there might be some move tech out there that would flavor up some of the moves a little more, but even in this game, the swap X for Y on a stat when doing some action is really dang useful. And I like the clearly spelled out outcomes for partial successes because it does absolutely make the game feel tough. The one thing, though, is that the Sprawl is very much classic R. Telsorian cyberpunk. It's not like it's the full genre of cyberpunk transhumanism. If you want that, you probably want something like The Veil, which is more genre scale. The Sprawl is corp anti-corp missions by desperate agents. If this sounds like your jam, you can get it on DTRPG, but you have to be careful and notice that there are 2 editions, one of them called Midnight, which is white text on black pages, versus Noon, which is black text on white pages. So know your limits and choose carefully which one you're getting, but this book is worth buying. You can get it out there on DTRPG, and it's wonderfully good if this is the sort of thing you want to play.
Yeah. What do you think of the Sprawl, Kieran? Have you had a chance to play it, or?
I've not played the Sprawl. It's one of these things that I'm absolutely of the age where I came up. Like, I think the first Cyberpunk 2013 was the first what felt like an indie RPG I ever bought. Like, it looked, the art wasn't right, and it was all kind of in a box and falling to pieces and had zines. And I was very aware that, and of course, that was also very cyberpunky, because then cyberpunk was a new genre.
Ooh,
and therefore, like, the fact that, I've just read my Gibson and now I can do this, that was actually a new thing. That was quite radical. Mm-hmm. But of course now, Well, no, it's a cyberpunk as conceived of then. Is this little history piece?
Yeah.
But I must admit, part of me would love to go there. There is a kind of like weird nostalgic. I mean, it's awful to be nostalgic about a dark future, but like when last time I was over, I did find my old like cyberpunk books and the pages of guns and lists and hardware and equipment. It's like, what on earth was anyone thinking?
Yeah.
But it was so fun to generate that stuff because it was just an imagined future, and you can imagine stuff too. But it always would come down to lists of guns, so many guns.
Right,
that was,
right.
just what you ended up with.
Yeah, so it's nice that the Sprawl, like, I got to play the Shadowrun-esque version where we're not allowed to call it Shadowrun, called Touch Prime, which is super exciting. It was really, really fun, new playbooks and all that. So I had a good time with the Sprawl. Definitely one of my favorites. Even though, Sherri, you bring up a good point. It's older PBTA, but it did really fun things with the moves. I like the fact that you had to roll. There was a move to see if you got paid or not.
Exactly.
That was really
it was,
good.
Hey, get the job, and if you roll badly, you're already behind the 8 ball, and then at the end, roll to
So
get paid. And you're
good.
like, oh, we did great. Oh, we only get a few
It was
pennies.
good stuff.
And they
I
shoot
love that
at
so
us.
Kieron, how about you? How was your gaming in the months of March and April?
Well, I'm going to have to beg forgiveness here for the listeners. I have had a weird time, like in a good way. I was joined by Iris at the end of January. So the time since then has primarily been in childcare, and I have yet to manage to actually sit down and game. And before that, due to the nature of my work had to hand over the manuscript to Di to look Ronan Deckard, and I'm writing the major Marvel event this year. So I had so much stuff to get off my plate in January, and ever since then, childcare and then getting on top of everything again. I've not played any gaming in that period. So the last gaming I had was at the end of last year. So like until end of November to like very beginning of January. I look back at that and it's like, oh, that was a golden magical gaming period for me. I mean, I look at the games I was playing and I am delighted. On Gauntlet, I actually played 2 short seasons. One game of Girl Underground, which I'll be talking about in a minute, and also Delta Green. And I love the idea that 2 such radically different games I'm playing. I mean, Delta Green was interesting because I've never played anything that's Cthulhu based in terms of the Chaosonium system, and I haven't played anything real world and harsh real world for a while. Like, if you're playing something narrative or PBTA, you've got the moves to help you. But I was in the place of there, like, how do I break into a house? Like, and I had to remember, oh no, player skill's a thing. I need to remember how that works. So that was hard. I was not good at it. Off Gauntlet, I finished like the second full Die campaign I've ran. Like I run lots of like short, like the 1 to 6 session sort of length, but big long campaigns. I've done 2 during development. Like one was about like 35 episodes, and this one was around 14, 15. And that was really a big emotional ending. Really interesting characters.
Nice.
And it wrapped up nicely. The players were delighted. And for example, every long playtest you end up doing, it ends up becoming more about your friends as well, because short games, it's you know what I mean? It's like, it's not just the playtest, it becomes like, well, if I wanted to really test these rules, I'd be doing this now, but in reality, we're creating a beautiful thing together, and how can I ruin my friendship like this? I played The Haunting House on Holly Street, which was released as part of the Patreon. It's a 2-player card from Brindlewood setup. So in other words, it's basically using the Brindlewood engine to investigate what's gone wrong with a haunted house.
Ooh.
Which is really good. Like, because I haven't played any Brindlewood games yet. I've been fascinated by the blasphemy of the core figure stuff out mechanic. Because it's like, the idea, oh no, the point of it, you know what I mean, it is. The idea of a mystery is there's an objective truth which we're trying to uncover. And the genius of going, oh no, there's no objective truth. We're going to work out what's happening. And that's like, it's complete galaxy brain. And it's so delightful. We played that a couple of times back to back. Very different setups. Liked it a lot. And, I will be playing it again. It's quite hard to do with just 2 people. Like, the theorise doesn't work quite as well, I think. But,
right.
You know what I mean?
Oh,
like,
that's a good point.
'cause especially if one person's running the game, it's quite hard to step back and be more freeform. But we enjoyed it a lot. Something this Christmas I've done a couple of times in the past is I run a game set in a 1980s style dungeon. In this case, the one from Dragon Warriors, a British old school RPG. And I run it for 2 groups of 5 people simultaneously. And I cut between them every 10 minutes. And they're running in the same dungeon in alternate dimensions, so they each know what's happening in the other dungeon.
Ooh.
But so they can cheat whilst going through it. And the meta thing is they're trying to get Christmas presents for each other. So someone in the other team, they're trying to work out what to get them. So it ran in 2.5 hours. It's very quick. It makes you obviously your brains falling apart at the end, but a delightful way. And then I also ran Monster Hearts for some friends who've never played a PBTA before, and that's always the big joy. You know what I mean? In terms of like, these are people who know games. And that moment when you first in a PBTA game, you know, you leave something behind. Oh, you've left your friend behind. And literally the moment of panic, you know, imagine, you know, you run for people who don't know PBTA, and seeing that gem is joy. What I want to talk a bit more about is Girl Underground. It is a PBTA game. It's by Long McMahon and Jesse Ross. It's basically a Portal Fantasy setup. So it's the idea of the game is you are communally playing the girl, quotation marks, and the girl goes into a fantasy world and tries to get home, or not. They meet friends, sort of words, it's very much Alice, very much Labyrinth, Sidney Maguire's Wayward Children. So they meet friends who represent different parts. He's a big, you know, the Tin Man type of archetype. And then, you know, you go on this wonderful, quite gentle, but also piercing fantasy adventure together. And it's the way it sort of runs is the mixture between the rotating nature of the girl, like all defining her stuff at the beginning, and then each player gets introduced their own archetypal character. I'm going to list the names because it says so much. The Beastie, the Construct, the Faun, the Mythic, the Ogre, and the Runaway. You know what I mean? Like, these are big archetypal things, and immediately you know, oh, I'm a Cowardly Lion. Or like, you know, oh, I'm Ludo from Labyrinth. And it's a game where basically the girl starts with 5 what are called manners, as in like things they consider true, and they become questioned over the game and become beliefs. And as you become more powerful by getting more beliefs. For example, I mean, young ladies must always keep their feelings to themselves would be an example of a manner to begin with. What worked for me? Well, for a start, it was like, it was an amazing group. I played with Sabine a bunch of times, and I've never had them actually facilitate for me. So actually finally having a chance to actually have Sabine run, facilitate a game was really amazing. First time with Ray too, as well.
Yeah,
Wade.
it was so great. Yeah, super fun.
Yes. What really works is the archetypes are so strong. That's the thing, it's like, immediately you know what you have to do, and to fulfill to the group. For example, I played the Ogre, Lobelia Thunderfoot. And the Ogre's the idea is that it's a Ludo character who's the big, you know, strong, but like very strong and powerful, but also like, you know, a bit confused and small in other ways. And I played like a hobbit, basically, but a hobbit who was 20 foot tall and had to be kicked out of her kingdom. That was the kind of the idea. But immediately, you know what to play. And they even give you a list of like, your individual principles is very key. So my principles were, look up to the girl, make yourself small, bring your size into it, be brave when it counts, and do something embarrassing. You know what I mean? Like, and that is such strong guidance for role play.
Very strong.
You know what I mean? Anyone, I think like you give it to anyone, they know the class anyway, because the classes are so, but specifically they break down the archetypes that powerfully, and it's like immediately you're contributing to the group. And I found that really useful. The art's great on the game. Immediately, if you open up the actual, the zine, like the first image is like little girl being hugged by a big giant furry thing. And instantly, like, A, or, you know, R. But B, like, oh no, that's it, I get it. It's about these relationships between these archetypal creatures and this girl travelling through the thing. And I think most important, like, manners to beliefs is a really good way of mechanising the fundamental nature of the fiction it is trying to convey. Like, this is the story that, you know, this is what happens in these stories. They question things about themselves and discover truths. And it's also a good way of modernising it. So it's slightly, you know, there's a meta aspect to it.
Yeah.
Sort of words like we can, you know, we can do questions about like girls should always be called she is an example of one of the manners on the list we used, and that's kind of like immediately brings it to something much more modern than something that is like Alice. I mean, like one of ours was young ladies must never tell lies, and you get to rewrite them when they become truths. All beliefs, as the game puts it. Young ladies must never tell lies. We changed to some truths are worth lying for, and that's fun. Stuff I'm less sure about is like, while the archetypes are open, so you can really, you know, I've described my enormous Hobbit ogre. There's also, like, some of the moves seem a bit too specific. You know what I mean? Like, and you kind of get that in some PBTA games, that you're trying to, like, lift from bits of the genre. But like, there's a control the elements move in Ludo. Right? And that felt a bit like, no, that's specifically Ludo from Labyrinth. And it was quite, I reskinned it on the fly, but did kind of not really feel a more broad ogre. The Stand By Your Convictions, which is how you use your beliefs to achieve stuff, felt a little bit like disconnected from the rest of the mechanics. It's basically a kind of, it's almost like an auto-win PBTA move, as in like, if you can work out a way to stand by your convictions, you can pull anything off. And it felt like it needs to be more like a climax move. Like you get to build towards using that move maybe once at the end of the game and have some, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the story structure there was, you know, there's probably stuff along the way you can do with it, but I felt like, oh no, this needs to be a bigger deal. And finally, the bit that, not that I felt like broke the game, or like, but it's that it felt most dissatisfying for me playing is the simple rotating of the lead character. It made her less real for me. As in, like, the fact that all the aspects, these sort of supporting characters felt very, very powerful, whilst the kind of the floatingness of the girl made her become less real or important. And for a central character, that felt weird. I was more tied up to the individual character stories than that. And also, I kind of was like, I missed them. It was like, no, stop playing the girl. Come back, Captain.
Right.
And it made me think I could sort of see why, because it's a very sensible choice in game design to sort of do that, because everyone wants to basically invest in the lead character. But it made me think, like, this is probably one of my takeaways, is that I'm quite into the idea of roles in games. Like, as long as you get buy-in at the start, you don't need equal agency for all characters. Like, I would very happily have played that game if, no, I'm playing the girl, quotation marks, and everyone else is okay, I'm a supporting character, and I know, I'm very happy to play Ludo. You know, and it's like, and the supporting characters can have a lot of agency. I mean, Han Solo is a supporting character in Star Wars. And all that kind of stuff made me really think about, like, what space is there? And there's not many. I mean, like, there's not many games that have that as a firm thing. I mean, there's bits of it. You sort of see in PBTA games, someone jumps on being the villain. That's, for me, that, you know what I mean? There's something, like, almost to it there. And I suppose for the Queen's interesting in that the main character, in quotation marks, isn't a player. It's a game about everyone's rotated aspects to her. I must say, this actually directly inspired me to making a little quick itch.io game I did called The Greatest Gamer, which is a meta game based around, you play a board game, but then one person is officially playing the greatest gamer, quotation marks, and the other players each take a role card, and they basically have to do and they guide their play according to this personality. For example, they've got the bitter rivals, and, you know, at the beginning of the game, claim that you're going to beat them this time. You've got plans, you know, and then by the end of the game, come to admit that, you know, no, you're never going to beat them. They're much better than you'll ever be. And, you know, and that kind of, like, performance role, I think there's something really quite fun about the idea of taking on a role in a different way. Anyway, that's what I took away, and I just loved it, though. It was the delight.
Yeah. So, Sherri, did you want to say anything real quick about Girl Underground, or...?
All I can say is I haven't played it, though I want to, but I keep kind of missing my chance. So one day I'll get to the table with it, but just...
Yeah. And I keep thinking about what Kieron said. I kind of want to create a personal hack of the girl as a playbook. Like, I'd like to see... I'd have to look at how it... But, you know, that being said, I think Jessie did such a great job with so much of the design. Like, it was such a joy, such a delight. But I really agree about... I'd love to see the girl... as a character, and just letting someone be the main character. That's super fun. I
think it's also a game. Really good games are inspiring. You know what I mean? So I came away absolutely fired up and thinking about games. You know what I mean? So like, it's a hell of a design. So
for my own months of March and April gaming, it's that usual thing where I think, I didn't get to play so much, and then I look at the calendar like, okay, this is still a fair amount. So off the gauntlet, we recently started a playtest campaign of Hello World, which is one of my favorite Forge in the Dark games. It's also cyberpunk, but it's like off to the left and to the right? Like it was originally inspired by Transistor, the video game. And I also got to play Yazaba's Bed and Breakfast, which is so good. The whole time I played it, like each chapter takes only half an hour to an hour to play. Like, it's really, really good stuff. I also got to playtest a game I'm working on with J Dragon, which is kind of exciting. We're not so sure about the title yet, so I'm just going to call it the game I'm working on. And then also got to play Abyssal, which is a Forge in the Dark game of monsters. I'm continuing my playtest for the Twilight Throne on Actual Play and a few other places. And our Blades in the Dark game has apparently been around for about a year. We've been taking a few months off, but it's been a year of my 2 cultists, which has been really interesting. Continuing Godbound, we finally got to roll dice last time, which is really great. So we finally got to, because we just kept ignoring the rules. And then I also got to play Arhant, which was really nice and sweet. Get to play a game that I'm no longer working on. So it wasn't a playtest. I was just playing the game just to have fun. What a concept. And on the gauntlet, I also got to play Arhant, which just started. And also, I got to play Balikbayan, which it's been a while since I played and run Balikbayan, so that's a game I'm going to talk about today. Feels a little self-indulgent, but Balikbayan is a supernatural cyberpunk game I'm working on. It's my first big game, so it's been on a journey. So what is it? It is a supernatural cyberpunk game that is belonging outside belonging in particular. It uses that structure, so it's token-based. And players are runaway elementals trying to bring about the rebirth of magic. They're on the run from the corp. And it uses a lot of Filipino folklore, mythology, and it has a post-colonial approach to it. So it's really interesting that Sherri brought up the Sprawl earlier, and Balikbayan is like in the opposite direction, more towards Ray watched a lot of cyberpunk anime. And like I rewatched Akira and a few others. Recently, I was like, oh, that's where I got that for Balikbayan. Like, it's like in my subconscious. So for this playtest, what we've been doing is playtesting the new city structure in earnest. So this is tech I put together for Brinkwood Refuge and our haunt, and I'm trying it out where like the city is now a more organic, token generating, creativity, scene building. I make it sound really fancy. It's just like a few like moves like per city section. I don't want it to make it sound like it's over the top or anything. And yeah, it's been really fun playing this game again. And it's the first time with Sherri, because Sherri hasn't played Balikbayan yet. And Sherri is playing the new playbook that we're also testing. So that's been really, really cool.
No one else was brave enough. So I was the only one foolish enough to throw myself into the brink. So
yeah, because you know, those later playbooks, I don't know, in my experience, it feels like the later the playbook shows up, the more experimental it gets. And so there's a lot to, oh my gosh, yeah, that took some work. So the new playbook is the Capre. The Capre is like a mythological creature I've been thinking about a lot that I really love. Basically, in the original version, it's this like huge hulking figure that you confuse for a tree a lot of the time. Like the horror is like, you think it's a tree trunk and it turns out it's their legs. And they also like to smoke cigars, but they also have this shape-shifting quality about them, so they can turn into, you know, regular-sized people. And they go after women. Like most Filipino folklore stories, you have to hide your women. So most, like 90% of our stories are about these like mythological creatures going after our women. That's a lot to unpack there. But so I wanted to combine this like shape-shifting giant concept with cyberpunk, and I wanted to use like the ace pilot archetype that we see in like a lot of anime once again. So in particular, I was thinking of Macross Plus, which is like one of my favorite anime OAVN films. And so I was trying to like combine the two, and also really, because in almost every single playtest I've run Balikbayan so many times, in almost every single one, at one point, a giant mech shows up. Like, and then a few times, a part of the city has turned into a mech. And it kept happening again and again. And I was like, maybe I should just give the players a chance to just do it. Like, they just have to spend a couple of tokens and they can just do it. So the Capra has this ability where they can just like turn a part of the city into a giant mech. Why not? Because this is a raid game. So that's been a lot of fun. And it's been really fun testing out these new mechanics, but especially like with my regular playtest group. So that's been super, super fun. I was thinking about what you said, Kieron, in terms of like the longer you play, the more it is about your players. And for me, I've been playtesting with half of the same group throughout the whole, like, I think it's been a year and a half. It's always been Sherri and Josh, and then a rotating cast for the other players. I realize like I have been designing with Josh and Sherri in mind as we move forward, but also because Sherri and Josh represent, you know, the target players. But I definitely feel like when I've been working on this game, like, is Sherri gonna like this if I do this? Is Sherri gonna get upset if I hurt an NPC with this move that I wrote?
Then when you decide yes, they will, you're like, that's the move I need. So
but yeah. So what I'm less sure about currently, I mean, Balikbayan is still like in the middle of playtesting. There's still a lot to be done, but I'm less sure about, because Balikbayan compared to, I've designed a lot of belonging outside belonging games, but Balikbayan at its core concept really pushes against BOB's strengths, which is like slice of life and the sort of like laid back quality, the idle dreaming in the game, and this frenetic running from the corp, trying to bring about the rebirth of magic, like pushes against that. So I've been like tweaking and turning knobs, still not super sure about it. But I also don't know if I'm being too hard on myself, which is just, you know, a typical thing that comes up for all of us. But also I've been thinking about, because there are times when time passes, everyone's having a good time, role-playing, playing out the scenes, drawing upon different aspects of their character, but some people are just not using a move, right? So I have I think out of the players we have, John and Sherri have a tendency to not activate the moves as often compared to like how some other players would. And there was a part of me that's like, is this a problem of how I designed the game, or is it just a play style? And I keep going back and forth thinking about that, right? Like, it's also a PBTA problem. Like, how often do you activate a move, right? It tends to come up. So Yeah. Anyway, this was just a segment about Ray's design thoughts.
Yes.
So.
and on that, it is just a play style. It is that I do not like take a list of my moves and go must hit these. That is not me. I just do whatever it occurs to. So that's play style. Do not worry. I'm having a good time.
Hi listeners, I wanted to let you know that new issues of Codex are now available in the Gauntlet Patreon feed. Codex is the Gauntlet's bi-monthly role-playing game magazine. Each issue is organized around a theme and stuffed with brand new material for your table, including original games and supplemental material for games like Trophy and Brindlewood Bay. Check out Codex by going to patreon.com/gauntlet. Your pledge not only gets you Codex and other Gauntlet publications, but it also supports all the important work we do in the Gauntlet, including this very podcast. If you'd like to try before you buy, there's always a free issue of Codex available on our website, gauntlet-rpg.com. And if you're looking for back issues, you can find them on DriveThruRPG, including in reduced price bundles. Thanks.
Listeners, for our second segment, Kieron is going to talk about a topic of his choice. So, Kieron, we kind of have an idea, but what did you want to talk about today?
What I wanted to talk about today is, I mean, it feels really self-serving to just talk about the game you've got on Kickstarter, but kind of like that's what I'm doing. But like, that's what I really was sort of found myself thinking about is the weird journey to be here. Like, as I sort of said at the beginning, I've been listening to this podcast for 5 years. So, in other words, this was happening as I was starting to think about Die.
Oh, wow!
You know what I mean? So this is all part of the compost that sort of I was consuming, because I was consuming a lot of stuff and thinking about what the hell the games mean anyway. And like, this is, and I kind of want to talk about how to explain what I learnt about games via the form of the game.
Ooh.
I mean, I'll briefly sort of tell people what Die is. Die is something I did with Stephanie Hans. It's like a comic book. The idea was basically me talking to some friends and just having the joke of whatever happened to those kids who ended up into the D&D world. They'll be like, we made jokes about 40 now. All that kind of stuff. And then about 6 hours later, I found myself burst into tears as I realised I feel part of me went into a fantasy world at the age of 16 and never came out. And I thought, okay, let's talk about that. If it upsets you, it's a good reason to do a story. It's this kind of, honestly, like, I swear most of the thing of being a writer is a bit like what moves as a GM you make. Is this upsetting? I'm going to do it. So I started there and we started exploring, and it very rapidly became this big meta sprawling thing. But very rapidly, I sort of realised that I wanted to do more than that. As in, it had to be a game as well, because what's the point of doing a comic about comics when you can also do a game about comics? And this became a weird part of the project. You're sort of inspired by my friend Lee Alexander. She, narrative designer, critic, writer. She was sort of saying about Wicked Divine that it was most interesting when it was about stuff that really was about my specific intersection of things. So, like, I was going forward, I was thinking, okay, what would only I do as a comic writer? And the idea of like building an RPG from the ground up, like, it had to be scratch built. I couldn't hack something; that would be far too sensible. And doing it as a way to sort of democratize the comic. Because, like, a lot of my work, like, The Wicked Divine is kind of about how creators aren't gods. That's kind of what the subtext really is. It's the idea of these are just people. And we should all be in touch with the magic creative powers in ourselves. And that's kind of what RPGs are. RPGs are an incredibly amazing way to democratize and lower the ceiling on storytelling. It's when we talk about, like, genre emulation, or, like, living your own version of, it's also genre curation. You doing your own take on something from pop culture becomes your own take. Etc., all that stuff. Which led me to sort of Die. And the thing about Die is the comic, I knew it had a really sort of gamey core. Like, in the comic, the basic idea is, messed up people gather together, play an RPG, get transported to a fantasy world. In this fantasy world, they're confronted by their hopes and their, warped versions of their hopes and their fears, and things they never had in the real world, and things they can only have here. And then they decide whether to go home or not. And they have to all agree. And that's the key thing. It's like, dead people don't get a vote. That's the other hot... and that's a real kind of game mechanic-y sort of situation. It's the influence of reality TV shows. That's kind of that choice is as pure as a reality TV show. So, like, whilst that's also a really good, story for a comic, because it's clear decisions people understand, it's a good setup for a game. And the thing that immediately I got was the situation changes every single time depending upon the nature of the persona you put in. Persona is the name of what we call the people, the real world people. And that kind of led to Die, so it all became that instinctively I knew. And so much of Die originally was about instincts. But the more I sort of played it for people, the more it became like, okay, let's really converse with this. Because especially, like, we're doing Rookwer and Deckard for the Kickstarter. And I think the full manuscript ended up being like about 300,000 words. And it's now it's about sub 100,000 now, because a lot of the manuscript was me saying things again and again and again in different ways. And by doing all this process, you kind of like boil it down. So like what was originally like a lot of GM advice, because so much is about how you can make this kind of story. If you want the note behind of note, like Die, the RPG is about me explaining how you tell a story like Die, and also how easy it is to tell a story like Die. So instead of doing like tens of thousands of words explaining it or different theory and whatever, we boiled it down to very specific advice and very specific rituals and mechanics. And that's, of course, game design. That's what game design is. That's the magic of what we do as players. And ideally something that works well first time, every time. And then with dice, all the weirder stuff gets put in the back, and you can plug this on once you've got it. But the core game is ritualized enough to basically nail it. I mean, kind of like, describe the basic structure. After the safety ritual, like we're actually having, we've got Kiana Shaw and Lauren Bryant Monk working on our safety ritual at the start. Like we wanted to explicitly turn that from just being a bit soft. In my original draft, it was quite soft, as in you should talk about safety tools, these, instead of, no, do this. Something feels very much like how the Good Society does it, for example. Then the next ritual is what we call Persona Gem. And this was originally also kind of freeform, as in, here are a bunch of questions you might talk to your group about, and decide what sort of group you are, and etc., etc. Sort of questions to try to draw out their emotions. And like in the final version, there is just a core set of questions that will give you a really good group first time. As in, this is specifically, and of course it's limited, it's like you're people who went to school together, now you're getting back together again, down the line. That's the story of Die. And we've got other sets of questions, and we've got also the option to be freeform, but here's a set of questions which work really well. Ooh. And here's a good example. Like early on in Die, there was this kind of concept of you need to look, as a GM, you're looking for the fatal flaw, or like what is the sore lack in the middle of a character? And of course, the way we got it now is, there's a question there, aggressively, each player gets one of these awful questions about themselves. And the answer is that gives you the answer of what's really like the lack in them. My favourite one is the question is, there's something you really wanted when you were young, what was it? And that's in the list twice. And then it comes back later. And for the first one it says, that thing you really wanted, you didn't get it. How does that make you feel? And the next one is, that thing you really wanted, you got it. It didn't make you happy. And that's like, if you boil down Die to like what those persona, it doesn't matter how you are, you're going to be messed up. Because that's kind of people. And that's why they go to fantasy worlds to discover things about themselves. Mm-hmm. And this kind of goes back to like the other end of the aesthetic spectrum, but it's Girl Underground. That's what like Portal Fantasy is. You go to another place to discover things about yourself and then decide the nature of fantasy and reality. So that's kind of all the way through. So like now you've mined these persona, you've got all this stuff for people. Then you've got to use that to all this very ritualised way to make the fantasy world they go to. But there's a lot of like Die's GM advice boils down to some quite basic principles in terms of partially like persona generation never ends. Like even if you've gone to the fantasy world and transformed, you can still ask questions about the real world. It's like tell me about your favourite record, and then you can bring that in. Which these are classic Gauntlet sort of techniques. But where I think, and this is the weirdness of Die, because this is the stuff I did instinctively, not without realising, is that it's Cartesian. I'm really in a conversation about the nature of RPGs, because there's a narrative. All the Persona Gen I've just described is stuff which is clearly a narrative game. Like it's question driven, question, answer, and we build a world together. That's defining the real world. The actual visit to the world you're in and Die is much more objective. It's deliberately been written to sort of like, when I first ran, I think it was running it for David Morrison. I'm sorry, David, if it wasn't you who said this, but he described it as OSR. And I was like, I was what offended, but I was like, no, it's not. Then I realised, no, it is. It's based upon the idea of an objective reality that we're describing it. I'm describing it very, the system's very stripped down. It's deliberately like, I wanted to stay out of the way as possible. But it was very important that the fantasy world itself had pretensions to objectivity. In the real world, the players always have final say over anything to do with their persona. Whilst in the fantasy world, the GM has a final say. And so you've got these two, like, what is, the mind and what is the body. So, like, it's literally the Cartesian problem. And that's kind of like the conversation between these two forms of RPGs. And that's also the game. Okay. How these two things interact. And that's, and it's for me, the fun of Die. And now I've gone way down that hole, is that stuff is just there and emerges. And then every group decides how much it is. How much is your game going to be about what you do in the fantasy world, and how much is going to be about the trauma from the real world. And how much is it going to be both. And this is kind of like, for me, RPGs are about questions. And then the answers are what we say they are. And that's kind of what I wanted for Die. Because it's Yeah, it's definitely this game which is kind of my love song to all the different parts of the RPG. I mean, there's even a bit of a Nordic LARP in there, because, like, after you've done Persona Gem, you sit down at character generation and you pretend to be your characters embodied playing an RPG. So you make the character you end up transforming into whilst role-playing your persona in an RPG around the table. You know what I mean? And I know that's...
Amazing,
and it's only like a small...
amazing.
You know, it's such a small part of the game, and it's obviously a bit spicy and playful, but it's absolutely me going, my God, I'm going to briefly make you play a LARP. You know? It's really is kind of... What I kind of hope people get for the fact I've talked for 15 minutes without a break is that it's very much my love song to everything I've loved in games. But thankfully, working with RRD, we get to boil that down a bit more. You know, we get something that's actually useful to people. And some of the ways we've got rituals now in the game are really cool, I think. Like, can I tell you about the bestiary stuff? This is quite new.
Of course, This
is stuff that isn't in the beta. Like, one of the things was, like, obviously there's stuff about the Die universe in there. Like, the character classes are very unique. You know, they're their own things entirely. But what I didn't want to do is just describe what's in the comic. Because it's got to be your stuff. It doesn't matter. This is stuff that mattered to my persona in the comic. It doesn't matter to your persona. You need to make it personal to you. So what you do is deconstruct monsters. Like, classic things in RPGs. So the problem is that deconstruction varies for each individual. You can't just say, here's a Medusa who is cruel and mean to you like those cruel people at school were. You know? Because that's not useful to most groups. So what we've done is, we've done a classic RPG bestiary. I literally found that there's an amazing post on Reddit that worked out the most common monsters in RPG bestiaries. And we've selected the ones which are most common, so literally the ones which are in every one. And then we've done really basic stats, like really simple, because it's very important, the stat blocks are basic. And then we could do truths, we call them, as in these are statements about the creature which are meant to get you thinking about them. In other words, here's a way of looking at, say, a minotaur or a giant. And then then that makes you think about, okay, what could I use this for? It's like story prompts, but on a more philosophical level for the characters. In other words, like, I can just dig one out and read one, actually, because that's quite probably...
Oh, yeah.
Please do.
Fun.
So, for example, here's some bestiary. Here's some of the truths I wrote for giants. A theme in fantasy is creatures that once existed have been lost from our world. Giants are unique in that this is literally true. We've all met giants. We are born, surrounded by beings of petrifying stature. Slowly, as the years go by, they diminish. Giants remind us that once there were people who are bigger and more powerful than we are. They made us feel safe, or scared.
Wow.
I'm going to read another one as well. If giant can be an adjective, think of giants' relationship with nouns. It's not just that giants are applied to other monsters, for example, giant spider and so on, but nouns are applied to giants to give flavour. Fire giants, hill giants, storm giants. It often seems that giants are large, yet incomplete.
Wow.
You know, and then we've got a list of, like, what they make good echoes for example, parental figures. Anything that makes you feel small. Children, likely and uncontrollable.
Yeah.
And that's that feel like absolutely the Die way of doing it. Grant and I, that's what we're kind of doing for stretch goals as well. Like, the more, that's kind of, I've done some, and then we're going to get other writers to do really tight, smart, critical bursts of thinking. So I'm really excited by that.
Oh, that is so cool. I really love this, like, really insightful take on what the monsters represent. Very, very, so cool, so cool.
Yeah, my heart literally melted when you were doing that. I was like, oh yeah, oh.
Yeah, that's true about we were surrounded by giants. It's so true.
You tell that I'm just become a parent when I found myself.
I was thinking that.
That's like so much of fantasy as you think about your life and transform it. That's what we do. It's like, you know, that's, I mean, Die's a very bleedy game. Like, you know what I mean? Like, even if you always end up, if you're writing real world people, it always becomes slightly near you. And obviously we've got a lot of safety stuff around there. But at least that's part of it. I mean, Die's asking these fake people, what did they prefer, fantasy or reality? In reality, there's always enough of you in there you're really talking about why you play games. So why the hell do we care about this anyway? And that's really interesting stuff. Like, for any of us who've got scholars far into games as we have, it's like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Let's find out.
Yeah. So, listeners, you couldn't see when Kieron said Die is a game with a lot of bleed. Sherri made this, like, haunted look on her face. So Sherri, do you want to, because you've talked to me about this before, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that Bleed in its earlier incarnation was like one of my top games of the year a couple years back, because that was when I played it. It was a game where it was just, we had this sort of basic structure, none of the beautiful write-ups of the bestiary or anything like that, but essentially we were dealing with our characters as defined and with the lovely asymmetric setup that you came up with, which was quite the design, and that sort of starting set of questions. And we ended up going, oh, this is just going to be a hoot and it'll be fun. And, we're going to do this thing. By the end of it, we were all like, and it was weird because everything, it was like the questions plus the asymmetric design of the characters, like what we could do and what we couldn't do, what we couldn't achieve on our own, just ended up like in this engine of like sort of taking you back through all of your bad decisions and all of the mistakes you had made. And you were like sort of in this thing. And then you were as a group functioning, and it was intense. I mean, intense. And when I played it, I was like, well, I've never read die. All the other people have read die. So I'm just going to take the D6, happy-go-lucky, they do whatever. We start the game and I yell out, I'm a pirate. And they're like, we're playing a fantasy game. I'm a pirate. And they're like, we're not going to be on the sea. I'm a pirate. And then we do that and run through the game. And here's the thing is, I'm the one who's always pretending like I don't care and I'm just having a good time. But all the things I really want, I never get because no one takes me seriously. And it's like, and even when I do something cool, they're all like, oh, that's just, she just says it and it has to be true because the GM likes her best. And it's just like, oh, at the end of it was just like, but mine was not the worst story. It was just, but it just like really that kind of thing of we just naturally fell into those cycles of that. And like the system responded. It was an engine that I can't understand why it was that way, except that there was enough poetry in the dice to do it. And it was an incredible experience. That's all I can say.
I'm really, this thing, as somebody who's like flirted with game design for years, I've always been a Sunday painter. The absolute thrill I get for seeing people take a design and run with it and play it to incredible levels. It's like, I wish I was doing this years ago. You know what I mean? Like, it's such an incredible thing. I mean, it's very much like, especially early on with Die, like some of those early drafts, it was like, be very careful of the word you. Tell me about the time your persona was hurt. Don't say you, because literally you can imagine the bleed cascading.
Oh, no. Thank goodness it wasn't that.
Yeah. Oh, man. Playing the Fall is like, it's just a delight, because the Fall is an awful way of creeping up on you. Like, listeners, the Fall is the kind of the D6 class. It's meant to be you have basically super luck powers as long as you don't take things seriously.
Yep.
That's grim. Like, it's, that's an awful cage.
Yeah, and it's like the more you want something, it was devastating how it hollowed you out slowly. It was good.
Yeah, that is super exciting. I can't wait.
The funny thing, of course, it's been 5 years. There's so much I wanted to, I could talk about this indefinitely. I mean, it's like even stuff like, it felt like basically functional, those, when Sherri was playing it, and it worked then. And it's like, ever since, we've just been able to add more stuff and different angles and
refine, yeah.
And the scale as well, the idea of, okay, like, how does, I know how Die works across 4 episodes. How does character advancement work? How, what's interesting there? What is a high level move that's meaningful? And this has been really, it's really fun to actually get those questions down. I've enjoyed myself enormously.
Amazing. I'm so excited for this game. I can't even express it. For our last segment, dear listeners, we are talking about what is giving us life. So each of us talks about something that is lately inspiring us or giving us joy. So we're going to start with Sherri. What is giving you life lately?
So lately on Twitter, I've been watching the progress of a game announcement and people's reaction to it. And I've felt so happy and proud to see people like seeing those first little pieces of the Twilight Throne and them reacting so positively. It sounds silly, but that game is so dear to me. And every little piece and hint that I see of it as it's coming out, I am so excited for. And it has just been, I open up Twitter and I search around for any mention of it and all of those things. And I just keep doing that sort of, but everything is good. And it's not, it is literally so close to my heart. And of all things on Twitter. So hopefully it doesn't go terribly wrong because Twitter is a horrible thing. But I am just so glad to see that out there and people reacting positively and they don't have no idea what they're in for. So
I know. I literally, like, a couple of days ago, I rushed to the itch.io page to test if anything was up there, because the fact I'm out the loop due to the trial, it's like, has anything been released? But no. So I'm sitting there rubbing my hands. That's my...
Well, I did release the raw doc, which is incomplete. It's missing the GM section on my Patreon for my Kings, if anyone wants to check out. But, the game is coming out. It is coming out in a few months. I'm really just working on the layout. We're about 100 pages. It's very long for a beta. It's a chunky game. I was attacked on a panel recently on Big Bad Con. My co-panelist was like, Ray, are you capable of making short games? I was like,
how dare.
Yes. Yes.
I used to. I have more than, oh my gosh, I got attacked again on this one. I swear. Anyway, but we're moving on. Kieron, what is giving you life?
Well, first, the idea that, I refuse to accept the fact anything short of 200,000 words is short. No, trust me, I override. You're fine. What's giving me life is, I said, I'm really intensely working. I've got very little time for anything that isn't either work or the Kickstarter or Iris or whatever. It's a good kind of direction, but it's a lot. And Iris obviously gives me life. However, I can fit a very little bit of TV in, and Derry Girls is back. Do you know Derry Girls?
I've seen the trailers. Yeah.
So good. Derry Girls is about, it's set in the 90s, Northern Irish girls, Catholic girls in a mainly Protestant area during the Troubles. It's a comedy. It is 3 series in. It's just a lot. It's very, very funny. And what I find most enchanting about it is stuff I find very familiar. Obviously, I'm of a similar age to the characters. My family were my grandma's Irish, so it's lots of Irish stuff in my family. But I grew up in Stafford, so there's the stuff I recognise being a working class family of that kind of area. Your dad coming home with fish and chips or whatever, and all that kind of stuff. And then it's also got the stuff of bombs constantly being, but not done as a kind of grim and gritty, oh, life is the terrible of it. Just the weirdness of people living there, and you carry on living and make jokes and just one of my friends who was Northern Irish was talking about this as, and they used to have bomb scares so regularly in the record shop they used to go to. But, they just end up laughing about it. And so a friend from Britain was over, and he was clearly very worried and upset. And they were just sort of mocking him and going, boo-hoo, who's scared of the bombs?
Wow.
And it's and of course, it's only years down the line. Did he think, yeah, that was a weird thing to sort of be like? And there's so much that energy in Derry Girls. This mixture of you're still being a teenager whilst being in this situation which from the outside looks completely different. And it's so funny and so much I recognise. And I can't wait to watch. Every time I release an episode, I'm sitting there just waiting for it. It gives me so much life.
Awesome. I really need to check that out. And so for myself, what's been giving me life? Lots of good stuff lately, but recently was Big Bad Con Online, Big Bad Online. So that was super, super fun. I got to be on 2 panels, but actually what I enjoyed more was volunteering and doing stuff. So I got to moderate 1 panel. It was this really exciting panel of the TTRPG scene in India, which is really cool. So it was so interesting to see how it was so similar to what's going on in the Philippines, but so different in a lot of ways. So that was very, very cool. And I also got to be a Twitch moderator, and it was so much fun just being part of chat, seeing what is going on, and then just relaying back and forth. And so it was 7 hours of Big Bad Online in one day, because I didn't look at the schedule properly, and I thought it'd be split across 2 days for me. But it was super fun, and it gave me so much life because we don't really have that big of a TTRPG scene here in the Philippines. So it's just really nice just being part of this really vibrant community and just seeing so many people just being so excited about TTRPGs. So hopefully in the future, when this panini is a little less panini, I'll be able to one day end up in a convention in the West. That would be super cool. But yeah, that's definitely what is giving me life. It was such a great time. And you can catch all the panels on YouTube. They'll be uploading them. By the time people are listening to this podcast, it should be on the YouTube. So, listeners, that's our show. Thank you so much for playing with us. You can check out the show notes for links about the games we discuss. And once again, please check out Die on Kickstarter right now. And you can find out more about The Gauntlet at thegauntlet-rpg.com, where you can find articles, podcast information, and links to our forums. You can follow us on Twitter at GauntletRPG. If you're interested in playing with the Gauntlet, do check out our forums or check out our Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet. Remember, the hard part is spelling Gauntlet right. You know, I say this all the time, and I keep wondering about that. But apparently that is the hardest part. So please do check us out on Patreon. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you so much, Sherri, for being with me as our wonderful co-host.
A joy and a pleasure.
I wish people could see what Sherri's face looked like when she was talking about that experience playing Die. It was such a sight to behold. And thank you so much, Kieron, for coming on. It was so great hearing you just speak poetry to us. That was amazing.
Thank you. Honestly, it's like, did you feel like do a reading from a game manual? Just suddenly.
Yeah.
What am I like? I do.
Oh my gosh. Definitely. I think you could do that with Die. So thank you so much, Kieron. It was absolutely lovely having you.
It's been lovely to be here.